There is a place just outside St. Louis where American history, unimaginable wealth, and family tragedy collide. Millions of visitors know it as Grant's Farm, a beautiful estate filled with animals, historic buildings, and the famous Budweiser Clydesdales. To many, it looks like a perfect American success story. But hidden behind the gates stands a mansion that witnessed more than a century of power struggles, betrayals, family feuds, and the rise and fall of one of the richest dynasties in America. This is the dark story of Grant's Farm, the story of the Busch family, and how a beer empire built one of America's greatest fortunes, only to nearly tear itself apart from within. Because behind the smiling advertisements and iconic Budweiser brand was a family fighting battles that few outsiders ever saw. And at the center of it all stood one extraordinary estate, America's beer empire mansion. Long before the Busch family arrived, the land belonged to a different American legend. Ulysses S. Grant, future Civil War hero, future President of the United States. In 1848, Grant received land from his father-in-law, Frederick Dent, whose family owned a large plantation in Missouri. Grant attempted farming the land himself and built a small log cabin called Hard Scrabble. Today, that cabin still survives and remains one of the most important historical structures connected to Grant's early life. Life was difficult. Grant struggled financially. The farm never became successful. Few could have imagined that this quiet land would eventually become one of the most famous private estates in America. Decades later, a German immigrant businessman would see something entirely different in the property. Opportunity. That businessman was Adolphus Busch. Born in Germany in 1839, Busch arrived in America with ambition and a talent for business. After marrying into the Anheuser family, he helped transform a small brewery into what would become Anheuser-Busch. His greatest achievement was Budweiser, a beer that would eventually become one of the most recognized brands on earth. As profits exploded, so did Busch's wealth. By the beginning of the 20th century, he had become one of America's industrial giants. And in 1903, he purchased the former Grant property, not simply as land, not simply as a farm, but as a statement, a monument to success. The estate would eventually become known as Grant's Farm, and over time it evolved into something far grander than its humble beginnings. At the heart of the property stood what became known simply as the Big House, the Busch family mansion, massive, elegant, private. For generations, it served as the center of the Busch dynasty. From the outside, it projected stability and prestige. Inside, it became the stage for family politics, succession battles, and enormous pressure. The mansion overlooked a kingdom built on beer. Factories, distribution networks, advertising campaigns, railroads, millions of customers. The Busch family wasn't merely wealthy. They were American royalty, and like many dynasties, the greater the fortune became, the greater the tensions grew. Then came disaster. In 1920, Prohibition arrived. The manufacture and sale of alcohol became illegal throughout the United States. For breweries across America, it was a catastrophe. Thousands disappeared. Many never recovered. The Busch family watched as the industry they had spent decades building suddenly faced extinction. The empire survived through alternative products and sheer determination. But the scars remained. The family learned a lesson that would echo for generations. No fortune was untouchable, no empire was permanent, and no amount of wealth could guarantee survival. After Prohibition ended, Anheuser-Busch entered a golden age. The company expanded aggressively. Advertising became legendary. Budweiser transformed into a national icon, and nowhere symbolized this success better than Grant's Farm. The estate expanded. Exotic animals arrived. The famous Budweiser Clydesdales became a centerpiece of the property. Grant's Farm later became closely associated with the iconic horses that helped define the Budweiser brand. Visitors saw luxury, tradition, success. But behind closed doors, another story was unfolding. One that involved enormous expectations for every Busch heir. Being born into the Busch family came with privileges few could imagine. But it also came with burdens. The pressure to maintain a billion-dollar empire. The pressure to protect a family legacy. The pressure to live up to impossible standards. Generation after generation inherited wealth. But they also inherited conflict. The family expanded. More heirs entered the picture. And as fortunes grew, so did disagreements. Questions emerged. Who would lead? Who would inherit? Who would control the future? These questions lingered quietly for decades. Eventually, they would explode into public view. Perhaps no family member embodied Busch power more than August "Gussie" Busch Jr. He transformed Anheuser-Busch into a corporate giant. Under his leadership, Budweiser became synonymous with American beer. His influence stretched far beyond brewing. Sports, politics, business, charity. His presence was everywhere. At Grant's Farm, he represented the image of the powerful patriarch, the man holding the dynasty together. But even great empires often depend heavily on a single individual. And when that figure disappears, cracks begin to show. The Busch family story contains remarkable success, but it also contains deep tragedy. Across generations, the family experienced public scandals, personal struggles, and heartbreaking losses. The immense pressure associated with wealth often produced consequences that money could not solve. For outsiders, the Busch name represented perfection. Inside the family, life was far more complicated. The mansion witnessed celebrations, weddings, births, business victories, but it also witnessed grief, arguments, and growing divisions that would eventually threaten the future of the estate itself. To outsiders, the Busch family appeared to have everything: private estates, luxury automobiles, political connections, access to the highest levels of American society. But living inside a dynasty often comes with a hidden cost. For generations, Busch family members were born into expectations few people could fully understand. The family name carried enormous weight. Every public appearance mattered. Every decision could affect the reputation of the company. Every heir was measured against those who came before them. Imagine growing up knowing that your family controlled one of the most recognizable brands in America. Imagine knowing that millions of people recognized your surname. The pressure was immense. While ordinary families worried about household finances, the Busch family worried about protecting a corporate empire worth billions. The mansion at Grant's Farm became both a sanctuary and a prison. It offered privacy from the public. Yet it also served as a constant reminder of the responsibility resting on each generation's shoulders. Many heirs struggled to find their own identity. Were they individuals, or simply caretakers of the Busch legacy? It is a question that has haunted wealthy dynasties throughout history. And the Busch family was no exception. The larger the fortune became, the more difficult it became to keep everyone united. As generations passed, the number of heirs increased. Different personalities emerged. Different ambitions appeared. Different visions for the future took shape. Some family members wanted to preserve tradition. Others wanted change. The seeds of future conflict were already being planted. No one knew it yet. But those divisions would eventually threaten the very future of Grant's Farm itself. Few marketing icons are more recognizable than the Budweiser Clydesdales. Towering horses pulling red wagons, polished harnesses, perfectly choreographed appearances. For generations, they represented strength, tradition, and American pride. but their story is deeply connected to Grant's farm. When Prohibition ended in 1933, August Busch Sr. presented a team of Clydesdales to his father to celebrate the return of legal beer. It was a symbolic moment. The brewery had survived one of the darkest periods in its history, and the horses became living symbols of that survival. Over time, the Clydesdales became inseparable from the Busch family image. Visitors to Grant's farm came specifically to see them. Children grew up associating the horses with Budweiser. Television audiences watched them during major sporting events. They appeared in commercials that became American classics. Yet the horses represented something deeper. They symbolized permanence, a connection to the past, a reminder that the Busch family was not merely selling beer, they were selling tradition. The irony, of course, is that while the horses projected stability, the family itself was becoming increasingly divided behind the scenes. As the years passed, the public image remained polished. The reality became much more complicated. Most mansions eventually become museums. Grant's farm was different. For decades, it remained a living part of the Busch family story. Within its walls, some of the biggest decisions in the history of the company were discussed. Business strategies, succession plans, family disagreements, future investments, all unfolded behind closed doors. The public rarely saw this side of the estate. Visitors experienced the attractions, the animals, the beautiful scenery, the carefully maintained image. What they did not see were the private meetings that shaped the future of one of America's largest companies. The mansion became a silent witness. Presidents visited, business leaders visited, celebrities visited. Yet some of the most important conversations happened far from public view. Generation after generation gathered around the same tables, walked the same hallways, looked out across the same land, each believing they would leave their own mark on the family legacy. Some succeeded, others did not. But all became part of the larger story. And as the years passed, the mansion accumulated something far more valuable than wealth. It accumulated history. Every room contained memories. Every wall held stories. And by the beginning of the 21st century, those stories had become inseparable from the fate of the Busch dynasty itself. The downfall of great dynasties rarely happens overnight. Instead, it begins slowly, almost invisibly. Small disagreements become larger disagreements. Business decisions become personal conflicts. Trust begins to erode. For the Busch family, the warning signs appeared long before the sale of Anheuser-Busch. The brewing industry was changing, competition was increasing, consumer habits were evolving. The company remained powerful, but maintaining dominance was becoming harder than ever. Meanwhile, family ownership structures became increasingly complex. As more descendants inherited interests in the business and estate, reaching consensus became difficult. Questions that once had simple answers suddenly became complicated. Who should lead? Who should decide? Who should benefit? These issues confronted many family-owned empires. The Busch family simply happened to face them on a much larger stage. By the early 2000s, the cracks were becoming impossible to ignore. The dynasty that had once seemed invincible was entering its most vulnerable period. And the events that followed would shock both St. Louis and the wider business world. Because for the first time in generations, the Busch family was about to discover that even empires can fall. For decades, Anheuser-Busch appeared unstoppable. Then the global business landscape changed. Foreign competitors grew larger. Corporate consolidation accelerated. Pressure mounted. In 2008, a moment arrived that many members of the Busch family never imagined possible. Anheuser-Busch was sold to InBev in a massive takeover deal. The company that had symbolized family control for generations was no longer theirs. Grant's farm itself remained connected to the Busch family, but Anheuser-Busch had entered a new era under foreign ownership. For many observers, it felt like the end of an era. A dynasty that once dominated American brewing had lost control of its crown jewel, and the emotional impact was enormous. Then came the family war, not over the brewery, over Grant's farm itself. After the sale of Anheuser-Busch, ownership questions surrounding the estate became increasingly complicated. Multiple heirs held interests in the property. Different visions emerged. Some wanted to sell, others wanted to preserve it. The disagreements became public. At one point, proposals emerged involving outside buyers, including the St. Louis Zoo. Competing bids from Busch family members created a highly public family dispute. Suddenly, the estate that symbolized family unity became a symbol of division. Brothers and sisters found themselves on opposite sides. Lawyers became involved. The media followed every development. The family fortune had created extraordinary wealth. But now that wealth was helping fuel a bitter struggle. Throughout the chaos, one thing remained. The big house, silent, watching, waiting. The mansion had survived world wars, prohibition, economic crashes, corporate takeovers, family feuds, and still it stood. Its walls contained over a century of stories. Stories of presidents, beer barons, millionaires, family battles, and American ambition. The estate became more than property. It became a physical reminder of what happens when extraordinary success collides with human nature. The story of Grant's farm is not really about beer. It is not even about money. It is about legacy. Every generation believes it can preserve what previous generations built. Yet history shows how difficult that truly is. Ulysses Grant struggled to make the land profitable. Adolphus Busch transformed it into a monument to wealth. His descendants fought to protect it. Others fought to sell it. Each generation saw a different future. Yet the estate survived them all. Perhaps that is the greatest irony. The people changed, the fortunes changed, the ownership changed. But the land remained. Today, visitors arrive at Grant's farm expecting to see animals, history, and the famous Clydesdales. Few realize they are walking through one of the most fascinating family sagas in American business history. A story of immigrants and presidents, beer and billions, success and heartbreak, power and loss. And standing quietly above it all is the Busch family mansion. A mansion that witnessed the rise of a dynasty, the fall of an empire, and a family forever changed by the fortune it created. Because sometimes the greatest stories are not found in boardrooms or factories. Sometimes they are hidden behind the gates of a family estate, waiting for history to reveal their secrets. And Grant's farm may be one of the greatest examples America has ever known. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe to Old Money Media for more deep dives into the rise and fall of America's greatest industrial dynasties, business empires, and forgotten legends.